All right, everyone, welcome to the first online genealogy class of fall 2024. Going to first, before we begin, we're going to go over a couple of things. This class is being recorded, so if you miss anything, you don't need to worry. You will be able to see it again later. I will also be sending a follow-up email to everyone tomorrow that will include a link to a copy of my slides, as well as the handout, which I am posting in the chat box right now. I will also be sending a link to the chat transcript. So if something important comes up in the chat, you'll be able to get the access to that. The chat box is open. So if you want to go ahead and say hi and tell us where you're joining us from, you can feel free. I will have plenty of time for questions once my presentation is over. So if you could hold your questions about the information I'm talking about until the end, I would appreciate that. But if you're having any technical issues or anything like that, please do let me know. All right, so our class today is using immigration and naturalization records to research your ancestors. So for those of you so before we get going, we have one more piece of business. We acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people and as a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning. Deliberations and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. So I see I have a lot of people here who have been to my classes before. Welcome back. So for those of you who may not know me, my name is Jessie Wheeler. I am the genealogy specialist here at the BPL. I work in the Research Services Department, which is located in the Central Library in Copley Square. So today, as I said, we're going over immigration records and naturalization records. So we'll be talking about some good things to know about each type of record, a little bit of history in regards to immigration to the US, and some available records and resources. I will be focusing primarily on records available at the BPL and in Massachusetts, but I will be talking a little bit more broadly. So if you're joining us from elsewhere or if you're researching another location, we'll still have some stuff that may be useful to you. So first off, we're going to talk about immigration. So just getting down to basics. So immigration is the act of moving from one country to another to permanently reside there. There's another term called emigration that starts with an E. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. So a couple of good things to know about immigration records. And this first point is particularly useful if you're researching people who came to America during the colonial era. Someone from the British Empire, if they were traveling to another part of the British Empire, so basically, for our purposes, if they were traveling from the United Kingdom to what is now the United States, both are in the British Empire, they would not have to register on a ship. So this means that records for that time period are very spotty. In fact, many of the records that we do have for that time period for folks who came to this country during the colonial era, most of what we do know comes from other records. They wouldn't necessarily come from ships records. It would come from letters or diaries or things like that. For example, the only reason we know who was on the Mayflower was because one of the leaders wrote it in their journal. That's the only reason we know who was on the Mayflower. There was no ship register for that ship. Another good point to learn, this is particularly if you're researching Irish immigrants. A lot of immigrants from Europe, we're talking later on, so more in the 19th century. This is particularly from Ireland. They would first go to Canada on a bigger ship, and then they would come down to the US, usually on a smaller vessel and sometimes even over land. This is why you'll see there's a lot of people of Irish ancestry in the maritime provinces of Canada, because sometimes they would decide, oh, this is pretty cool, we're just going to stay here. Another thing about passenger listings in particular, the US government did not require passenger ships to have registers to file them until 1820. But before that time period, it's very unlikely that you're going to find a record with your ancestor on it. It's entirely possible, but there's not a lot from before that time period. So accordingly, so the records that we do have, particularly the records that the National Archives have, those are going to be records starting from 1820. And I think what they have mostly now are coming up to 1982. Oh, Rochester, my niece goes to college at RIT. That's great, Kendra. All right. So so a little bit of immigration history. This is just broad strokes. Of course, the history of immigration to the US is a long and complicated one, as anyone living in the US today knows. So starting in the 1700s, people coming to this country are primarily British. There would be the odd person or two from other countries. For instance, there were, in fact, people who came from Ireland during that time. Those are going to be, a lot of them are going to be, call themselves Scotch Irish or Ulster Protestants. They came due to religious persecution. So there were some Irish people here before that. But a lot of Irish started coming between 1820 to 1860, with the biggest bump during the Great Famine. If you're interested in learning more about Irish immigration, I have taught a class on this in the past. There is a recording of that on the BPL's YouTube channel. So in the later half of the 19th century, we start seeing increased immigration from other parts of Europe. So we're kind of expanding outside of the UK and Ireland. You'll see people from Eastern, Northern, and Southern Europe. So this is when you start seeing a lot of people, a lot of particularly Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution in their countries. So you get a lot of folks coming due to pogroms, and particularly there's a lot of this going on in the Russian Empire and other countries around there. So that's when you start seeing a lot of those folks coming over. In the early 1900s, this is when you start getting a large-scale immigration from Asia. There were a fair amount of Chinese immigrants coming in the later 19th century, but in the early 1900s, that's when we start seeing a lot of immigration coming from Japan. And then even further on into the 20th century, particularly around World War II, you'll start seeing large-scale immigration coming from Mexico and other Latin American countries. That's when that starts, which is still represents the largest group of immigrants coming to the US today are from South and Central America. So if you do want to learn more about the history of immigration, there are several different places you can look at. We're not going to look at all of these, but we're just going to take a quick look. We have a few timelines on here. So this is one from history.com. You'll go into a little bit more depth of what we've already talked about. You can see it'll go more into the legislation that was going on. So these are things that are important to know if you're doing research during a historical time period. I always recommend that folks do some research about the history of what was going on at the time they're looking at. So then you can get a sense of what was going on for your ancestor, and that can give you a good idea of why they were where they were, why they did what they did. Learning the history is incredibly important when you're doing ancestry research. You don't want to just find out anything about what your people were doing. You want to know what was going on, to put them in the context of their time. And particularly if you're looking for immigration records, you need to know what were the laws going on? Like, was my ancestor even allowed to come during this time period? Is it likely that they were coming during this particular time period? So there's a lot to keep in mind when you're doing this kind of research. So for immigration records, the primary records that will be available will be ship's passenger records. So either passenger listings, they're also called arrival records. Depending on the time period, they'll have a lot of information or a little bit of information. Generally speaking, the more recent, quote unquote, the record was, the more information there will be. Very early records from the first half of the 19th century, oftentimes they might literally just have a name. And that would be it. And sometimes they'll have an age, but most of the time, for many places, it was just the name. As time goes on, you'll get more and more information. It'll tell you where they were from, even the last place they lived, their occupation, and at some point it was a requirement that they had to say who they're going to stay with once they get to the United States. This particular column, if you're able to find that, is really important. That can give you a sense of who in your family was living there before the person you're researching, because a lot of folks, when they came here, they would be staying with a relative that was already here, whether it was a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a child. You never know. There could be, or I've even encountered things that said they were going to live with an uncle or they're going to stay with their brother-in-law. So that's a really, if you get a passenger listing that has that, that can be a really good way to find out who else in the family was already here. So if you want to learn even more about immigration records, then I'm going to be talking about the National Archives a lot. So just prepare yourselves. They are the best resource for a lot of what we're going to talk about. So they have a lot of really good information on their website about immigration records. This will tell you what they have available, how to use it. And then again, this one also gives a pretty succinct record of the legislation and what was legal and what wasn't. Because there have been periods over time where there were quotas, where some people were allowed and some people weren't, and all sorts of things. So this will give you a better idea of what they have, what's out there, and how you can get certain things. All right, so now we're going to talk about some other resources for immigration records. So this is all stuff that we have here at the BPO. We actually have a fair amount of this. A lot of these things were pretty widely published. So this particular here is a big set called the Passenger and Immigration List Index. This is a massive set of beige colored books. They're very big. I think we've been getting them for 30 some odd years now, possibly longer. Oh, 1985, so almost 40 years it's been published. They published a supplement every single year. So we have lots and lots of volumes of this. So what these will have are literally just lists. Unfortunately, the way there is not a cumulative index for all of the volumes. So in some cases, you will have to look at multiple volumes just to see if you can find the person you're looking for. And these will be in Research Services, which is my department, which is located on the second floor. These are going to be out in the open shelf in the Elliott Room, which just recently has become our local and family history area where the bulk of the collection is. So we're very excited about that. So now all of the local history and genealogy books we have are going to be in one place, including all of these lists of immigration records. So, and that's just the biggest that we have, but it's by no means the only one we have. You look at this link later, you can see how many others we have. We have some specific to different types. So this one, so we have listings from New York City. There we have one set for Swedish immigrants. We have another set for German immigrants. We have one for Italian. We have one for Irish. So these are very specific, organized by country. We have one for people arriving in Baltimore. We have a lot of published material on this. We even have one for Pennsylvania Germans. So some of these are pretty specific. So if you happen to be researching anyone that fits in one of these books, you might be able to find them there. All right, and so while we do have a lot of books, the bulk of what we have is on microfilm. So the biggest set that we have is the Index to Passenger Lists of Vessels Arriving at Boston from 1906 to 1920. This is 11 microfilm reels. So you can, so this same set is also on ancestry.com. So you can come here and do a search through that way, or you can you have your own subscription, you can look at it there. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can get the stuff online in a bit. But this is one of the bigger sets that we have. This gets used a fair amount. I'll say, however, the index is a little, you do have to have a good idea when the person you are researching arrived, so you can get a better sense of what ship they were on and who they were traveling with. Okay, there we go. So one of the other, oops, there we go. Okay, actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So this is actually the biggest set down here that covers 1891 to 1943. This set here is also on Ancestry.com. It's 454 reels. It doesn't have an index, so this one you do have to have a really good idea of the name of your person or when they arrived. So these were based on work done during the Great Depression by the Works Progress Administration. That was one project they had where they basically had people go through all of the ledgers they had and film them. So it was a really good effort. But this one right here, this first list here, passenger list of the Holland America line. So we do have this on microfiche that covers about 40 years, but what's really cool is this was recently put online for free. So if you had any ancestors from Holland that came in the first half of the 20th century, they might be in here. However, the main caveat is that the default is Dutch on the website. So when you get to the website, you have to over there in the upper right hand corner and click on English. Unless you happen to understand Dutch, then you can go for it. There we go. So the search, this will just give you information. It's not perfect, but this is pretty cool. So if you have someone who came over on this line, whether they're Dutch ancestry or just traveling through there, they have some really good information. And you can see here, it's not the best search interface I've ever seen, but it does have some cool stuff in here. We're just gonna click on this guy here. So if you click on a person, this will tell you the date that they arrived, where they left from, the continent, and other people on the same page of the register as him. So this will be a good way to tell if someone was traveling with their family. So you can see here there's some Italian names in here. It's possible that they were just leaving through there. That was something that did happen a lot. Some people would travel to another country before they came over, just usually because it was cheaper in some way, or maybe they were refugees. So there's a lot of reasons that could happen. So we just discovered this recently, and we just thought it was so cool, so I added it in here. All right, so now we're going to move on to naturalization records. So naturalization is a legal process of making a person a citizen of a country they were not born in. So naturalization records are a little bit more complicated than immigration records that we've been talking about. Immigration records, it's pretty straightforward. You're basically looking for, it's a passenger listing. That's very simple. Naturalization records, we'll get into it. There's different types of records, and they're a little harder to come by. So the BPL does not hold or have access to any original records beyond what's available online. There are some things that are available on Ancestry.com. There are some that are available on random other websites. So I believe the Massachusetts Secretary of State's office archives has some records on there. But by and large, most of these are not going to be available online, particularly if you're looking for more recent things. And also, again, much like immigration, laws changed, requirements changed. Prior to 1906, naturalizations were generally handled by local courts. So it could be a city court, county, state, or federal. They all would do naturalizations. After 1906, those were done just by federal courts. So you need to have a fairly good idea of where a naturalization occurred. If it's not on one of the general websites that you can do a keyword search, you have to have a good idea of where it happened in order to find a record of it, because you would need to go to the courthouse where it happened in order to get the record if it's not online. So There's any number of courts that could be. So, but however, with that, a lot of those records are held also by the National Archives. There was a requirement for a while that you have to send a copy of all of your naturalization records to the National Archives. So a lot of them will be there, but if you happen to live somewhere where your ancestor was naturalized, it would probably be easier, not to mention quicker and cheaper, to get it from the local court if that's more easily accessible to you than the National Archives. So that's why it's good to know, if you know where this event happened, that's the easiest way to get a copy of that record. So for those of you who are really into the genealogy research, if you've done any kind of research on women, you know researching women, particularly before, like, say, the mid-20th century, can be very tricky. And this is no exception for naturalization records. For a big chunk of time, so from the 1850s to the early 20s, most, not all, but most married immigrant women would automatically become citizens if their husband were naturalized. So in that case, they would not have their own naturalization records. They would just be part of their husband. So if you're researching a woman from this time period, she may have been a citizen, but she would not have her own record. You would need to know her husband. So that's true generally for finding a lot of information about women. Can figure out, look for their husbands generally. So they're not going to have their own. And this is also going to be true for minor children. And if their father was naturalized, they just were automatically citizens. So another thing to go along with that, American women who married foreign citizens during a certain period of time would lose their American citizenship. And then sometimes if, like, their husband died or maybe they sent a petition, they might have been able to get it back. So that's another really tricky thing. We did have a speaker on this topic last year. So his name is Rich Venetia. So if you want to Google him and find his presentations, they're great because this is a very complicated issue and I'm really only going to be able to scratch the surface here. So unlike immigration records where there's just basically one record, there are 3 different types of records you could find for naturalization records. So there's first, the Declaration of Intention. So these would also be called first papers. So this is the first thing that someone would file. And for the most part, they would have to do this they would have to live in the US for at least 2 years before they could do that. That's your first papers. So then would be the petition for naturalization or second papers. So those will be filed at least 3 years after the Declaration of Intention. So a lot of the information on these 2 different forms are going to be pretty much the same. If you've done a search for these types of records on Ancestry, you might see it came up as 2 different records, but they look pretty much the same. And that might be why, because the information is pretty much going to be the same. The forms are very similar. The way you can tell that these are 2 different forms are the date is different. So, and the third type of record would be the certificate of citizenship. This would be granted if the petition was approved. So one thing to keep in mind, sometimes citizenship wasn't approved. So you might get the first 2 records, but not the third, or you might get the first record or not the second. This could be for many reasons. The person might have passed away before they could get to the second step, or maybe they just never got around to doing the second step. So for a lot of folks, you might just get the Declaration of Intention and there might be no other paperwork. And this would be largely because they just didn't do it. There's a lot of reasons that could happen. They might have gone back to their home country. There's really no way to know. So a lot of times you're just going to have the first one there. Okay, so there are some resources. So a lot of these can be findable. So generally speaking, these types of so these are just general resources for both, because these 2 record groups are a lot of the time they're combined. The National Archives basically has combined them. So for the most part, both types of records are going to be held by government agency, either at state or federal level or both. A lot of them have been digitized, particularly immigration records. Those are more widely accessible than naturalization records, but not all of them are. So if there is a resource online, for instance, ancestry.com, if you have a good idea of when someone got there, but you can't find them, just check again another time. Things are always getting updated. Not everything is online yet for passenger listings, immigration records. That's basically an ongoing project. It's a little easier to get those uploaded. All right, so now we're going to take a look at Ancestry Library Edition just to show you what's available in there. So this includes, so they have an immigration and travel section. So we're gonna see if this will open up for me. There we go. Oh, great. Okay, so let's just try this. Again, of course it would do this tonight. Okay, so let's just try this again. Okay, good. All right, so if you have your own subscription to Ancestry.com or if you come into the library to use it, what you would want to do is go down. You can see here, there's a tile here that says search immigration. So they kind of lump everything, all of these naturalization and passenger listings under immigration and travel. You could go down there. Okay, and it's doing that again. Okay, so Ancestry is acting up tonight. We're gonna do our best here. Hopefully it will behave itself. So you can see here on the right-hand side by category, the different types of records they have. So the biggest collection would be the passenger listings. They do have some citizenship records. One of the other cool things they have are passport applications. So those I really like. Those are really cool because they will include the passport photos. So if you've never seen an image of someone before, I've had this happen with some folks I've been helping with that. A copy of the passport photo is the only photo they've ever seen of their ancestor. So those are pretty cool. And these are just a few of the collections here. They have a lot of stuff. So let's see. So let's say we're looking for someone. Okay, so just for the heck of it, I'm going to put in the name of one of my ancestors to see if we can find him. So I know he was from, so at the time he was born, oh, so they're calling it Germany. So another thing to keep in mind, particularly if you're looking at naturalization records, the country might be different. For instance, my ancestor here, at the time he was born, it was called Prussia. It is now Germany. So that's something to keep in mind if you see a different name. For instance, if your ancestor was from a country that was once part of the Russian Empire, it might say, even though, though they were Polish, they considered themselves Polish, they immigrated during the time when Poland was part of the Russian Empire, it will say they were from Russia. That's another thing to keep in mind when you look at these. Okay, so let's see. All right, so I can tell you this is not my ancestor, it's just someone with his name, but we're going to take a look at this anyway. You can see, so this is a naturalization record set from California. So let's see which one this is. So this is the naturalization petition. So this will tell you what it is. It looks like, and so normally when the website is not acting up, you'll see a thumbnail image of the actual record. Today it seems to be reduced to a little dot. I'm not quite sure what the deal is with that. But you can pin this up here so you can get it. Okay, so there we go. So this is a later one, so this is good. A, because there's a lot of information, and B, this is typed. So you can actually read it. A lot of these records are handwritten, so it can be a little tricky looking at this. So for instance, this person we can see here, it tells you even the town, the specific municipality in Germany where he was born, his birth date, when he filed his declaration of intention, tells you whether or not he's married. If he were married, it would have the name of his wife, where and when they got married, where his wife was born, who his children were when they were born. So this, for this time period, if you find a naturalization record, it's a gold mine of information. And it'll also tell you where he last lived. It'll tell you when he arrived, what name, if the name was different, the name of the ship, and the date he arrived. And the other interesting thing, which was what I was saying, so this person, part of becoming a citizen, you have to renounce your loyalty to the sovereign or the head of state, wherever they were from. So for this person, the 1930s, so it was the Reich. So that's me saying I am no longer going to be loyal to this person. So that's another thing why I mentioned the Russian Empire, because depending on what the time period is, it's going to say the Tsar. So anyone who came around from that part of the world around World War I or before that, they're going to say Tsar Nicholas II, for instance. And this will tell you where he's filing this petition. So this was in San Francisco in 1933. He's telling, so, and then down here, you have his signature. And then at the bottom, it'll have witnesses. It's popping up. And there you go. So sometimes there will be a second page. I'm going to see if this is, oh, this is being weird on me. Okay, there we go. So let's see if there, yep. And there's a second page. That's another thing on here. Sometimes it's not going to be clear that there's another page, but there is. So this is just another oath of allegiance. The clerk, so it'll tell you his certificate number. So if he was granted citizenship, so you can see here, it's a little fuzzy because the image isn't loading, but down here it says petition granted, and it gives you the certificate number. So that's really helpful. If you wanted to go find the certificate number for this person, you know you would have to go. It was in San Francisco, where the closest to the federal court in San Francisco. And you have a certificate number. So you know the court, you have the number, so you can go ahead and request that. And again, no picture here. Sometimes there's a picture if you get lucky. All right, so that is a naturalization petition. So, all right, so if let's see if we can pull up a passenger listing for someone. Let me try. All right, so let's do, all right, so let's try. More generic name. So this is a family name for me. They were born in Rhode Island, so this is not going to be the right people, but here we go. Okay, so naturalization. Okay, so let's click on passenger listing over on the left here. That'll give you passenger listings, because that's what I want to show you. And I'm sorry, it's being so slow. It's usually not this draggy. All right, so there we go. So here's one for Ellis Island. We can get it to load. And it's doing that again. I do apologize about that. Hopefully, if you all try to use it when you come here, it won't be acting up like that. Okay, it's being annoying still. Okay, so let's see if we try clicking on this. All right, I think it's going to load for us. Okay, so again, this is a more recent one. This is from 1928, so it's typewritten, which again, much easier to use. That is when the image is loading properly. So this will tell you the name of the person. So this is actually, it looks like this is actually a crew listing, but it's still pretty similar. So this will tell you where they lived, where they were from. So you got a lot of people in here who are from England. And I'll have and this particular, so this is a British. Okay, so let's go back. That's not quite what we were looking for. Okay, there we go. Let's try this one. Okay. All right. So this is from the 50s. So sometimes in here, what's kind of neat is you'll stumble on plane manifests. I don't know if this is one of them. I think it actually might be. So there are some records for people who traveled here on plane once that was feasible for most people. That is pretty cool. I don't know if this is one of them. So this is okay. So this will have pretty cool. So this will have the name and their passport number. So if you wanted to try to find their passport information, you could look it up that way because it gives you the number and it tells you where they're from and where they're going and for how long. So if you're researching ancestors who traveled a lot, looking at things like this and also passport applications, you can get a sense of where they were going and what they were doing. So I'm not going to force you to watch Ancestry being glitchy any more than we need to. So one thing I will add, so a lot of the stuff is also in Heritage Quest, which I like to call Ancestry Lite. And you'll be able to see why once it loads. There you go. It's run by the same company, has a lot of the same records, and has pretty much the same layout. It has the same graphics even. So it's very, very similar, though the search function, you can't search everything. You do have to pick a collection. So this one will have, on the search page up here, you can search immigration records. So they'll have things that they recently updated here, but you do have to pick a collection. So you kind of have to look through the list and see what's in there. All right, so I said earlier we're going to be talking a lot about the National Archives, and here we go. So the National Archives has a lot of stuff. They have, including here, a lot of early naturalization records. So that comes from, okay, if this is going to come up for me. Okay, so and early as in starting right after the end of the Revolutionary War, going back to 1790. They do have things that old over there. So this is just a nice little presentation. It actually goes into even more detail about the agencies that were in charge of naturalization and various other aspects of it. Also, if you live in the Boston area, there is a National Archives location in Waltham, and they have their own collection of ships listings. So they do have this is particularly useful if you're researching someone who was a sailor or something like that. It'll have records related to things that arrived in the port of Boston. So this is from 1789 onward. That's when they started requiring it. So if you're researching someone who was ever on a ship that came to New England from 1789 onwards, you'd want to contact the folks out at Waltham. And also, I get a lot of folks lately who are trying to do dual citizenship. The National Archives will also have a guide for that. Some countries are going to be a little easier than others. I know I've had a lot of folks coming in here lately who are trying to get Italian and dual citizenship. They're one of the trickiest places to do that. So that's just something to keep in mind. So this is stuff that they can help you with. They'll tell you all about the paperwork you need to find, where you can go to find different records. If you need a certified copy, that can tell you where to go, how to get it, excuse me, and just goes on a lot more detail about all the different records you need to get dual citizenship for certain countries. All right, so leaving briefly the National Archives, there are, like I said, there are records in Massachusetts. So as I mentioned before, the Massachusetts State Archive also has a collection of naturalization records. See, there we go. So they have a collection of passenger listings as well. There's a lot of overlap with what we have here. So it's a lot of late 19th century issues. So let me see, naturalizations, here we go. Okay, so you can see here, they do have, at the judicial section of the archives, they do have some naturalization records. And these can be pretty cool because these will, a lot of them will have photographs, particularly if you're looking for after 1930. So that's another way that you can see if, again, a lot of folks, this is the only image they've ever seen of that particular ancestor. So this will just go on to you. It explains again, before 1922, married women and minor children just became citizens when the male head of household did. And this will just tell you what kind of information might be on it, what places to go to. So this is basically what they have. So as they say here, sometimes they might not have a lot of information for genealogy, but they're really good to have anyway. So you can do further research. And so this will tell you how to get a hold of this stuff through them. Right, so the other big one, and I know there's been a lot of controversy with this lately. So this is the formerly known as INS. It's now, so Immigration and Naturalization Services. It's now the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So USCIS is what they're called now. Sometimes this will be the only place that has, particularly if you're researching someone who's more recent, they are going to be the only ones that will have it. And I know it's been a little tricky lately. They keep changing the fee schedule. They keep trying to make it really, really expensive. And they have a backlog. So I would recommend, if you can get these records anywhere else, do that. And I would, again, recommend using these folks only as a last resort. But they do have a lot of stuff. It's just they are the most difficult place to get things from. So again, I would use them only as a last resort. If you can get it from a state archive or a courthouse or anything like that, do that first. It's much easier that way. All right, and if you wanted to learn even more about these, even more than I've been yammering on about, we do have some further reading here. Just like I said, it's a good idea to know the history and the laws, particularly if you're looking for naturalization records, because the laws changed so much and were fairly complicated. So reading articles like these and overviews can give you a good idea of what would actually exist for your person for the time period you're looking into. You really need to know all this. It's very important here because, like I said, it's very complicated and it's keeps on changing even to this day. There's been changes to the laws. Okay, so these are, again, more general resources here. So there are places to get some of this stuff online for free and not through a database. So we're going to look at a couple of these. So one of the biggest ones here is Ellis Island's website. They do require a free registration to actually see the records. But okay, I'm sorry, am I frozen or something? My video looks weird. Okay. Okay. All right, so this is Ellis Island's website. So the search function is a little clunky, but it's still pretty cool. So I'm going to try again just for the heck of it. My German ancestor. Sorry, no records found. Okay, so let's just do the last name because I know there were people with that last name. There we go. All right. So one thing that might be a little confusing, you can see down here where it says last place of residence, it'll tell you an American place. That's because this will also include people sometimes went back and forth. They would make multiple trips. This was particularly true for folks that usually the male head of household would come over first, make some money, then go back to their country of origin to get their spouse and their children. So that's something that happened a lot. So you can see here, this is your list of results. So let's click on that. So again, you do have to log in. This will give you a little thumbnail. So this will tell you where they're living, what their age was, and all this other good stuff. But once you register, the account is free. So once you get a free account and sign in, you'll be able to see the complete information. And if you're interested, for an additional fee, they'll send you a framed copy of the passenger listing if that's something that you're into. But it is, like I said, it is a little glitchy. It's a massive database, so that sometimes is a little slow. but still, it's really useful, and it's great that they've put all this stuff up for free. And Family Search is the other really good website. This is a gigantic free database. Again, like the Ellis Island site, it does require a free account. You do have to register for it. This here will just give you a good idea of what they have. So this is they have in a Wikipedia, basically. They'll give you links to their own collections and other places that have them. So this will give you an idea of what is available online and where. It's broken down by state and by time period. So you can see here, oh, let's say, for instance, they came to Massachusetts from 1899 to 1940. That'll give you a link to their collection, which we're going to look at right now. And it also tells you that it's on Ancestry, but you have to pay for Ancestry. You don't have to pay for Family Search. So I sometimes will recommend folks use this. Also because for whatever reason, their images are a little higher quality. And also they're not being all glitchy right now. Okay, so let's just pop in this name just to see what comes up. All right, and this is where it's going to ask you to log in. So I do have an account here, so I'm going to go ahead and log in there. All right, come on now. It's not being quite as glitchy as Ancestry, which is good. All right, there you go. So this will tell you over here, again, I'm not related to any of these folks as so far as I know. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So we'll just click on this guy right here. All right. So this is so this record right here, this is another record set that we have on microfilm as well. This is the index. So the index is basically these things here, which are index cards, literal index cards that they filmed. So this will tell you if you can get this to come up. No. Okay, so this is not gonna load for us because my internet is very slow tonight for some reason. I do apologize. So basically what these will have, this will tell you when they arrive. So you can go back to the main to the passenger listing and find the right date that you're looking for. So that way you can see more information that's on the listing and also who they may have been traveling with. So that's just one collection that they have on there. They have a lot of great stuff. As you can see, I have linked to them a lot because they have a ton of stuff and they are free. So another great resource is done by Stephen Morse. He has a bunch of different tools that you can use to search various collections. There you go. So this is kind of a shortcut to try to, target your searches a little better because as I said, a lot of these databases, they're not the best search functions. So what he has done here is try to make it a little easier for everyone. So I definitely recommend doing this, particularly if you're an absolute beginner at using these types of databases. All right, and this is just more further reading in case you are really wanting to learn more about all this. Another great guide, so the New England Historic Genealogical Society, which is located not that far from here, has put together a really great research guide for naturalization records. Again, like Family Search, you do have to register for a free account. I'm already logged in, so it's going to show up for me. So they'll give you basic introduction, different guides you can look at, how to find records. This is generally a pretty great resource for all sorts of genealogy topics. They have a bunch of different research guides that you can take a look at, and they're all written by professional genealogists. And the information is really good. It's a really useful place. All right, I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we'll get to your questions. Looks like there's been a few already, so I'm going to see if I can. All right, see if I can get the chat open. I didn't need to stop sharing. Okay, let's get back there. All right, so let's see if I can get the chat open. There we go. All right. Okay, thank you to everyone who said hello. It's great that you joined us. Okay. So Tracy's asking, how can I figure out what the local court is if I don't have the naturalization certificate? So that is something that's kind of tricky. Like I said, it's one of the one of the reasons why naturalization records are a little harder to get a hold of an immigration record. So basically, what you could do is figure out where the person was living at that time that you think that they would have been naturalized, and figure out what's the most likely place they would have gone. So if they lived in Boston, for instance, you could try the courts around Boston. You might have to contact a few different places to see if they have what they have, if they have the record you're looking for. But that's basically the way to start, is figure out where did they live and they were getting naturalized, and contact the courts in that area to see if they have it. Okay, so Victor is asking if we wanted to create an Ancestry library account, is it free? So there's two different kinds of subscription. There's a few different kinds of subscriptions to Ancestry. So Ancestry Library Edition, that's just our subscription. You can't, individuals can't subscribe to Ancestry Library Edition. And in order to use our subscription, you have to come to one of our locations. If you don't live in Boston, you could just check with your local library. It's one of the biggest and most popular genealogy databases. So you can just contact your local library. Chances are they have it too. So that is just at libraries. There's also two different levels of individual subscriptions. You can get a paid subscription that you'll have access to everything. And also you can build a family tree. And they also have free subscriptions where you can basically build a family tree. The only thing you can't do in the library version is build your family tree. You can look for records, you can save records externally, but you can't save records within it or add them to your family tree. So those are the primary differences. Okay, so Sarah's asking if I'm going to share my slides. Yes, I am. I will be sending a follow-up link to everyone tomorrow, so you'll be able to download the slides. And also for those of you who joined us a little later, I'm popping in a link to the handout here, and actually the handout has a link to the slides as well. So if you want to get a jump on those. So I think that covers a couple of things, okay? So Pan's asking, on ship manifests in the mid-1800s, would you expect family members to be listed together? Yes, generally they will be, because generally it's a little easier if they have the same surname to determine that they have the same family, because some of those listings will be just in alphabetical order by name. So if they all have the same last name, they should be together. If they didn't have the same last name, that might be a little harder to figure out. Like I said, mid-1800s is a little tricky. There wasn't a ton of information on those together, so that's a little harder to figure. But like I said, if they have the same last name, they should be all together. So Sophie's asking, what's the best way to find Native American ancestors? So funny you should ask. I'm actually teaching a class on this very topic in a couple of months. There'll be, if you go to our webpage, which I'm going to pop in here, which is just bpl.org/genealogy. You can see a listing of our events, and I am going to be teaching a class on Native American ancestors. So go to the class, or you can also look at our research guide. There is a section on there. That's going to be a different method of research, and there's a bunch of caveats with that. So it's not something that I can really get into right now, but I am teaching a class on that later this fall. So Leo's asking, if a person never goes through the naturalization process, are his children citizens? And that depends, because it really depends on the time period and how they got here. But generally speaking, no. If during the time period where minor children automatically become citizens when their father does, if he didn't become a citizen, they don't become citizens. There again, it depends on the time period. Like for instance, I have an acquaintance who came here in the 70s. As a baby, her father was a political refugee, so they were refugees and then he became a citizen and she became a citizen. This was in the 1970s, so that's another separate thing. It really kind of depends when they got here, what the laws were at the time, which is why I have so many links to information about the laws, because they're complicated. So I'm sorry, but the answer is it depends. So Tracy's asking, how do you find copies of records found in online databases that are only identified by microfilm number and other database codes? I find the source information very confusing. It is confusing. So basically, if you're looking at something that if the microfilm is at the National Archives, a lot of the time when you have a microfilm number, that's a microfilm that's held by the National Archives. So you would contact the National Archives to get a copy of whatever's on that microfilm that you want to look at. Otherwise, it depends on what the database is, and it depends on what their source is. So if you look at, generally, especially if you're looking at Ancestry.com, there'll be a description of the source of information. So if I can get our website back open over here. There we go. So we pop back into Ancestry, if it's gonna behave for us. They will have, actually, we'll just go into Heritage Quest and make our lives a little easier. So most databases should at least have a description of where they got the information from. So if you're a little confused, you can always look at their description or their note and see, and it'll say, what's the source? This is where we got this from. And then you can go back to that original source. But a lot of this stuff is going to be at the National Archives, particularly for naturalization records. Let me see if I can get one of these up. Okay. Let's see if I can just get this guy. Oh, and you're being annoying. Now, I'm really sorry these things are being so glitchy tonight. They're working just fine this afternoon. Okay, so yeah, so this isn't behaving for us right now. But if you were to basically at the bottom of the search page, oh wait, this is going to come up for us. Okay. All right, so there you go. So at the bottom, for instance, on Ancestry, it'll have source information. So it'll tell you what it is. And then down here, it'll have a detailed description. And this one has a link to the description at Family Search. So for instance, this one came from Family Search. A lot of them will come from Family Search. So I'd say generally speaking, for immigration and naturalization records, if you see a weird reference that you don't quite get, it's either National Archives or Family Search. Okay. So Victor is also asking, if I don't have any direct ancestors in the US that I am aware of, can I still find any information about them from any of the resources you shared today and or the BPL? So that depends on what you're looking for. So if you do live in Massachusetts, you can access any of our online resources, except you do need to come into a BPL location to use Ancestry.com. Or if you live in Massachusetts but not in Boston, your local library will probably have it. So you can find a lot of the stuff I've talked about here online. So again, just take a look at the different things I've linked to. You'll be able to access the slides through the handout. You can get that. So again, if you live in Massachusetts, yes, you can get all this stuff. But if you're having trouble, and if you can always send us an email. It's our email address right here. If you have any detailed questions, or if you don't live in Boston, contact your local library and they can help you out. Okay, let's see. So Suzanne's asking, does the National Archives allow you to go there to do your own research, or do you have to make research requests only through email? You can go there in person if you want to. That's actually sometimes might be a little easier because they do get backed up sometimes, but you can't, if you're able to go there, you can definitely contact them and make an appointment and you can go. They'll pull the collection for you and you can just look through it yourself. So that is something that you can do. It'll probably be microfilm that you're looking for because they're not going to let you look through the paper records. But yes, if you want to and you can definitely do that. And so Virginia's asking pretty much the same question about the Mass Archive. So again, that's the same thing. You can definitely make an appointment and go there in person if you want to. I just would definitely don't just show up there. Call them or email them ahead of time so they can prep for you, so they can pull the things that you want to look at so you can take a look at that. But yeah, it was a little tricky during COVID that all these places were closed, but everything's open again. So yeah, but definitely contact them ahead of time so you can arrange a time to go and they can get ready for you. All right, so that looks like that's the end of the questions that were in there. So we're going to give folks another couple of minutes in case anyone comes up with something. But while we're doing that, I'm going to head back. If I don't know why my internet is being so weird. Come on now. There we go. Okay. So like I said, everyone's going to be getting a follow-up email tomorrow that will have a link to the handout, the class slides, as well as our chat transcript. Oh, so Michelle's saying, my Heritage has been a great resource for me, but I can access only with Microsoft Edge and not any other browsers. Oh, so what you can do is send us an email. So it's the same email here, ask@bpl.org, and we can send that to our web services team and they can take a look at that and see if there's a bug that they can work on there. Okay. All right, so a little bit of shameless self-promotion time. So our next program will be next Wednesday. We're going to have a guest speaker, Christine Cochran, talk about forensic genealogy. So that's something that's been in the news a lot over the past few years, forensic genealogy. Basically, when you hear that a crime victim, a Jane Doe or a John Doe, has finally been identified, or the perpetrator of a crime has finally been identified through DNA, that's forensic genealogy. So it's been a pretty big deal lately, and you'll get some information about that in the follow-up email. So if that's something that interests you, definitely register for that. That is October 2nd at 6 o'clock. And our next online class will be the week after that, October 9th. We're going to be talking about databases you can use from home, and I hope that they are working. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. So that's what we have coming up. But again, you'll get information about those in your follow-up email tomorrow. So again, just as a reminder, this was recorded. So once the recording is ready, it'll be up on our YouTube channel, and I will send a link out to everyone so you can access it that way. You'll be getting links to the handout, the slides, the chat transcript. So if you missed something, don't worry about it. You'll be able to get it. You can also send me an email. My contact information has been all over the place. It's jwheeler@bpl.org. You can also send questions in to ask@bpl.org. That's our general email address. You can also give us a call Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And we also do a live chat Monday through Friday, 11 to 1. All right, so thank you everyone for coming to our first class. I'm sorry about the little technical glitches. I hope everything is going to be functioning better next time. So I hope everyone has a good evening and a good weekend, and I will hopefully see you all next time.